May I request all of you to please.
लाइव हो गया हो गया ऑडियो is not working. YouTube is live. YouTube is live. Audio is not working. Live.
The workplace in particular must be a safe and inclusive environment where every individual can perform without fear of prejudice or harassment. Unfortunately, cases of workplace harassment. The workplace in particular must be a safe and inclusive environment where every individual can perform without fear of prejudice or harassment. Workplace, unfortunately, called cases of Act workplace harassment. The workplace in particular must be a safe and inclusive environment where every individual can perform without fear of prejudice harassment or harassment. Workplace, unfortunately, called cases of Act workplace harassment. The workplace in particular must be a safe and inclusive environment where every individual can perform without fear of prejudice harassment or harassment. Workplace, unfortunately, called cases of Act workplace harassment. Workplace in particular must be a safe and inclusive environment where every individual can perform without fear of prejudice harassment or harassment. Workplace, unfortunately, called cases of Act workplace harassment. Workplace in particular must be a safe and inclusive environment where every individual can perform without fear of prejudice harassment or harassment. Workplace, unfortunately, called cases of Act workplace harassment. Workplace in particular must be a safe and inclusive environment where every individual can
Official committees and has numerous publications addressing these related issues. So I now request Professor Agnihotri to please start her presentation. She will be speaking today on analyzing women's studies in India committees and has numerous publications addressing these related issues. Over to you, please. So I now request
Thank you, Mr. Dad,
to please start her presentation. She will be speaking today on analyzing women's studies in committees and has numerous publications addressing these related issues. Over to you. So I now request
and making sure that
please start her presentation. She will be speaking today on analyzing women's studies in committees and has numerous publications addressing these related issues. Over to you. So I now request
I'm very glad that
please start her presentation. She will be speaking today on analyzing women's studies in committees and has numerous publications addressing these related issues.
are planned and proposed to be held within this year. I think this is not only a good initiative, but it's also a necessary initiative, because I think any law requires more discussion, but not only more discussion in terms of the legal provisions, but the issues which the law is attempting to address, those need wider discussion. And in our society, I think the more openly we discuss some of these issues, I think that is the first step towards addressing the problem. Because the different components of our society come from different backgrounds. India is a country which lives in many worlds at the same time. So if you come from the villages, it's a very different society. Urban India is totally in the digital age. It's a very different world. And women who come into this society and into different streams, institutions, also come from these different backgrounds. So our students, our staff, our faculties are living, what we say, they're straddling different worlds, different social levels of our development all at the same time, which gives rise to many questions also in our mind as well as issues. And I believe as a social scientist that the more openness we adopt to addressing these issues, that itself is a very necessary and a very first step to taking on the challenges. Now, I haven't prepared a formal presentation, but I have my notes which I couldn't transfer into a PowerPoint. So I'll draw upon that to talk about the situation today. When I say we need to analyze women's status in India, the issues and challenges, when I'm speaking about women, we must understand that women cannot and are not to be studied, or their issues not to be addressed in isolation. Women are a part of this society. So whatever changes are happening, whatever development is happening in our society, those impact women and women's lives. Of all India. So we must understand that it's not something to address in isolation. Secondly, that women are not a homogeneous category. All women, beyond their gender, basic gender biological identity, all women are not the same. Their lives are embedded at different social levels, in social structures, in classes, in castes, in tribes, in regions, in different states, all of which impacts their development, their day-to-day lives. So when we talk about women, we have to understand that we are not talking about a homogeneous category, even as we are talking about a specific gender identity and experiences which are linked to that specific gender identity. But that alone is never the case, because our lives are embedded in the social hierarchies, in the social divisions that characterize our society. And the same phenomena is experienced differently at different levels. So we must understand that. And we must understand that along with the basic stipulation that we all adhere to, which is that the Constitution of India promises us equality, it guarantees us equality, and the state and all actors of the state are, in a sense, mandated to ensure that equality, both in terms of the public life as well as in private life. So these are the broad general ideas within which we start looking at the lives of women. Now, when we talk about women, as I said, I come from a social science training, and the tools I use are drawn from my training. But that search, that social inquiry can be extended through other disciplinary models also. What I'm talking about, therefore, is women's status in Indian society. And this is an issue which has been addressed by different committees of the government of India. You'd be surprised, but one of the first committees and the reports we get on women's condition, women's status, is pre-independence. During the freedom struggle, when people felt that India is likely to be now free, that independence is sort of round the corner, then Indian National Congress set up a planning committee, the National Planning Committee. And one of the 37 odd committees that this NPC had was a subcommittee on women, which looked at women's status and issues. That report, which was actually prepared in 1937 or so, was published after around 46, because in between, a lot of the people, the women themselves who were responsible for that committee were behind bars in the colonial government's prisons. But in independent India, it was in 1975 that we get the first report. The Committee on the Status of Women in India was set up in the early 70s in independent India. And it submitted its report at the end of 1974, which then was published in 75. And surprisingly, you'll find it very strange. The report was a government report. It was based on government data. It was fairly critical of achievements in these 25 years sort of after independence. And why I said you'll be surprised is that the report was published just before the emergency. It was tabled in Parliament in February 1975. And it led to a lot of discussion. It was also used by people like me. I was a student at that time. And we studied that report to understand many of the challenges that we would face in our life. So and subsequently, we have a report which is called the High Level Committee on the Status of Women, which was presented, I think, in 2030. So all these reports use government data. Whatever is put out by government through its various departments, through its various data collection agencies. So when we talk about women's status, we're looking at reports and statistics coming from the Census of India. We come looking at the National Family Health Surveys. We're looking at National Statistical Organization. It used to be the NSSO, which gave its reports. Then various committees, including the National Commission on Labor, the National Commission on Enterprises in the Unorganized Sector. I can go on. That list is quite long, apart from every department of the Government of India giving its annual report, which also contains statistics. So we have a whole set of material which gives us an empirical basis to have an informed discussion on women's status in India and what are the challenges. I'll skip a lot of the data that we have, but I'll say 2-3 things. That one, what are the indicators that we see for statistics on India, and what are the broad areas in which we see inequality and discrimination which persists despite the state and constitutional mandate for equality. Now, the most positive data that we have since independence, it is the most positive story, I think, and it is enabling. It has developed capacity amongst women, and the very fact that so many of you are meeting today with so many women present here in this discussion is a result of what we call the most positive story, despite serious drawbacks, that is on education. I think the education enrollment rates, the bridging of gaps in literacy, bridging of gaps in terms of dropouts, addressing that challenge, extending education not only to women, but women from all sections of society, including the most backward, the most deprived sections, in the most remote areas. This, as I said, despite all the negatives in that story, that is, I think, the most positive set of data that we get from the Government of India. We also get it from various NGOs and which specialize in education, in studies of education. So AcSIR report, as we see annually. Apart from that, the statistics which we try to look at, for instance, one startling factor which the Towards Equality report of 1975, the first report that I talked of in independent India, was one of the most startling factors was the adverse sex ratio, as we call it, meaning to every 100 men, how many women are alive. And then the debate moved on from the 1970s, focusing on the demographic characteristic of an adverse sex ratio in India. The debate moved on to what we call the child sex ratio, which gave opened up a whole field of inquiry into why there was an adverse child sex ratio, because we can understand female infanticide, female mortality, child mortality, etc. But what was to explain an adverse sex ratio at birth? So these were inquiries. These are inquiries which are conducted on the basis of, firstly, primary data, which Government of India provides. Its agencies provide regularly from the census every 10 years, and some of the sample registration surveys, etc. But it opens up a whole minefield of inquiry, including the role of technology in that, which I'll come to later. So, as I said, demography was one area. Education was the most positive part. The statistics related to women and work, women's employment, which sectors women are employed in, what age group of women find employment, what are the conditions under which they work. This is again another minefield. It is also a very negative story to a large extent, although more recently, Government of India's data, the PLFS data as we call it, periodic labor force participation rates, etc. The PLFS surveys have shown that in the last 2 years post-pandemic, there is an increase in work participation rates for women. But otherwise, from 1921, more than 100 years now, in Indian data surveys, we find two things persisting: the adverse sex ratio and the adverse work, the low work participation or decreasing work participation. Now, as social scientists, we find these convergences very interesting and very challenging. They force us to think again and again as to what could be the reason for this. Then some of the other statistics or sources that we look at, I said, beyond work participation, we also look at the distribution of the workforce. Most of us do not realize that the higher work participation still falls in the rural countryside locations, and it is in agricultural work. Why is it that important to say? Because when we plan for women or envisage policy making for women, we have to keep that in mind as to where women are. So that is another aspect. Apart from work, one of the most debated issues in recent years has been, of course, women's political representation, where it's a mixed story. It's a mixed story in the sense that at the lower levels, in terms of local governance institutions, because of the 93 amendment in the people's representation and introduction of reservation, 33% in urban and rural local governance bodies, there is a significant, in fact, a phenomenal increase in women's participation. At the same time, we find that at the higher levels, whether it's the Vidhan Sabhas, the state legislatures, or the Parliament of India, participation has been poor. It has certainly not increased. It's not gone down significantly, we say, from 1947 to now, but there has been no increase. And that is why you will find this whole debate about reservation, considering that the women's movement in India had actually declined. You know, when the Constituent Assembly was taking place and the debates were happening, there was a debate about reservation for women. And the women's movement said, no, we believe that in independent India, we will have equality of opportunity and we will come through the normal routes of electoral processes. However, the experience of now 79 years, you can say almost 80 years, is not very heartening on that count. And therefore, this long debate and women's organizations campaigning for reservations for women in the legislative and parliamentary bodies has been there now for more than 3 decades. Since the mid-90s, at least, these campaigns have been on. So that is one. But one of the most damaging data that we get, one strand or one stream of data, one category of data, that is, and that was also triggered by pressure from the movement when, there were specific forms of atrocities on women which started to be discussed, reported on in public platforms. For instance, from the late 70s, we had this whole phenomena of dowry deaths. Dowry, we all know, has always been there in our society now. I mean, to the extent that on one occasion, the High Court actually passed a judgment which said that it's a tradition, which we protested. And we said that you can't say that because it legitimizes the demand for dowry. In a sense, if you say that it is a tradition, it's a custom, you're in a sense sanctioning the custom. And now, the giving of gifts at the time of marriage is one thing, but the demand for dowry and dowry deaths or dowry related murders, as we have seen from 1978, I can document it very clearly, both from my own activities and the institutions that I have been part of, including as a teacher in a college where young women face this both in their present as well as their future lives. This was a concern right through. So those figures, the crime figures in India are truly appalling. And they're not only appalling, they're alarming. It is alarming not just for women. If this kind of crime is going on in our society, be it sexual assault, rape, as we call it in popular meaning sort of the accepted terminology, not in something that is popular, but rape, sexual assault, crimes against and the sexual abuse of children, abductions, kidnapping, honor crimes. It is, alarming. If we as citizens of this country, as citizens holding responsibility at different levels of our social life and institutional life, and for all governments, because it's not one government, it's not one party. I'm talking from 1970s to now. And it was under this pressure that the National Crime Records Bureau actually introduced a whole section in its annual reports saying crimes against women. And if you go to the NCRB website, you will find that in the highlights, there will be one section which is about crimes against women. Now, when we discuss crimes against women, it is not a sensational matter, and we should not sensationalize it. We have to guard against that. We know that our governments are also very sensitive. When that famous BBC documentary came out, which said India's daughters are sort of the most vulnerable, the governments react. They're bound to react. We should not be upset by those government reactions. The point is, women are vulnerable not only in India. Cities like New York would have some of the worst crime rates, and some of the worst forms of violence exist all across the world. But that is neither any justification for what is going on in our society, nor should it be. We should allow the Western media to project Indian society. As the director of CWDS, where I was working for the last 25 years, I would get phone calls from media houses, media personnel saying, how do you respond to this label of Delhi being the rape capital of Delhi? What I'm saying is, I'm dead against this kind of projection of India being this kind of haven for criminals. That's not the point. The point is, we live here. You and I live here. You are in a more vulnerable age group. If we are not going to be concerned about what is happening in our country, then who else will? And all these crimes, they are not, I mean, a dowry murder is not just a concern of women. A sexual assault should not be the concern of women. If this kind of crime is happening in our society, all of us need to sit up and say, why is it happening? If child sexual abuse is rampant to the kind of, and this is, we're talking about only reported crimes. The incidence of crime, actual incidence of crimes and violence against women is much, much higher than what is reported. We're only talking about reported, registered crimes, which itself is like the tip of the iceberg. The sexual harassment at workplace is a similar issue. It's not on the same scale, but in terms of its seriousness, as the director, Mr. Dharja, has pointed out, the Constitution and now the Supreme Court of India enjoins upon all institutions to say that it is the responsibility of employers to ensure a discrimination-free environment. And I think that is a positive interpretation that the Supreme Court has given. It is a positive interpretation to say it is not just the incidence of crime that is a problem, but that the environment in which work is carried on, in which women are given an opportunity to work, that should ensure a discrimination-free environment. Now, it would be today nobody's case that only women and girl children are subject to sexual abuse or sexual crimes. I think all genders are vulnerable to such crimes. But it is a fact that women, on account of their biological entity of the female gender, are much more vulnerable and have been the victims of such crimes all along. So what I'm saying is, when we look at all these issues, we need to look at the data in the larger context of social development. Now, it is interesting that all the states, all the government reports that have come out on women's status have highlighted one very fundamental fact, or that has been a key to their observations. And what they have said continuously is that women's status needs to be understood, and changes in women's status need to be understood in the wider context of social development. It's not as if we can say that India is going into double-digit growth, India is going to be the fourth largest economy in the world, etc., etc. Our GDP ratio will be so high. Oh, the statistics on women, crimes against women, they're an aberration. No. What our government reports on women's status have highlighted is the fact that these are often interconnected phenomena, that to address the challenge of the crime rate and the crimes that women are exposed to, we have to understand the larger process of development, that women's marginalization, be it in the sphere of work, be it in the sphere of education, be it in the sphere of political participation, has to be understood in the larger context. So it's not as if we can say, no, on all these fronts we are doing very well. Unfortunately, we're not doing well in terms of the crime rate. That's not the way that we also undertake social science research and analysis, because the context makes a difference. The context determines the experience of different segments of society during the same years that progress is happening. So women's experiences have to be located in the wider social context. Similarly, a Dalit woman's experience has to be understood in the wider context of caste-based inequality, or a worker, a domestic worker, her experience has to be understood in that wider context within which she comes to work into people's homes. So what I'm saying is, as I said right in the beginning, that we do not isolate. We do not isolate women to understand what is happening to them. It has to be understood in this larger context, which is changing, which is not static. And therefore, any generalization that we make, any gender. Suppose I were to say, oh, women's situation is pathetic in India and no progress has happened. Women are always discriminated against. They're always marginalized. I would not be stating a fact, okay? Because as I said, all women are not equal, just as all men are not equal. And inequality is a fact of our society. Men also face inequality, women also face inequality. The reason why we focus on women from what we call a women's studies perspective or from a women's movement perspective is that women are more vulnerable and more susceptible to processes of discrimination, marginalization. Within that, different sections and different categories of women are more or less unequal given their status in society. So when we address issues of crimes against women, etc., we have to understand this larger social reality. For instance, when we look at the issue of sexual assault, to give you an example, the largest number of incidents of sexual assault happen in rural India. Now, if we want to understand, even though the most reported cases may be from urban India, whether it is Nirbhaya or any of these cases, these are reported from urban India. But in terms of the scale of crime and the scale of violence, the intensity of violence, the horror of violence would be by and large it would be higher in rural India. Unfortunately, our discussions do not factor in rural India. Now, why is it in rural India? Because more women in agriculture, more women in rural India. Till the 2011 census, we don't have the 21 census, unfortunately, which is a big gap in data, because even during the Second World War, the British managed to conduct a skeleton census, but a 41 census is there. Unfortunately, during the pandemic, this challenge was not taken on. So now we're still working with 2011 data in terms of statistics, and of course specific agencies which have brought out their reports in this period. So it is, the large majority of women are still in rural India, and therefore the violence that they face and the violence a Dalit woman would face in rural India is linked to her poor status in terms of maybe being a landless woman, being a landless laborer, being of a lower caste, lower in terms of socially designated lower caste, more vulnerable, and more vulnerable in terms of the power of the dominant castes in that location. So rural India does not somehow figure in our discussions. This is problematic because, as I said, that if we have to understand the context in which all these crimes are happening, in which this discrimination is being, women are being subjected to, or the margin, you have to understand the social processes, you have to understand the socio-economic context in which all this happens. So there we have a problem that our media also, and what has been going on in agriculture in rural India is something we all need to understand. Many of you are, at least all of you are students students of science. I don't know which branch of science you're looking at or coming from. But I was a student of history, but I studied the changes in, I was a student of economic history as far as my research is concerned, and I looked at agriculture in a particular context in the state of Punjab in British colonial India. Now, agriculture is directly subjected to and linked to policies. So if it is sustainable agriculture, as current terminology says, sustainable development, as people say, we need to problematize the subject in terms of what are the current policies over, and current policies means I studied it for British times. You know how cropping patterns are changed, how climate change impacts cropping cycles, how seasons are impacted. And there again, as I said, you cannot generalize because India has so many different agroclimatic zones. It has different cropping cycles. Now, we interfere with those cropping cycles. For instance, in the 60s, we interfered through the Green Revolution. I happen to have studied a rudimentary form of a Green Revolution, which was undertaken, I mean, it was not called Green Revolution, but an exercise which was undertaken by the British in Punjab. Now, the impact was very clear. The adverse impact of those changes in agriculture were very clear by the 30s, 1930s I'm talking about. Now, when we look at rural India today, and if you're scientists, if you're agricultural scientists, we can go into any number of issues. Similarly, in the other sciences, science institutions, what is happening is, for instance, when the discussion is happening, or even around STEM, which I suppose you're more familiar with, the whole thing of science, technology, engineering, mathematics, etc. All those discussions are also now today focusing, when we say women, it's focusing on managerial aspects of science or the participatory element in terms of how many women in science streams, how many women, what percentage, in which capacity, are they there in senior capacities, are they there in managerial level bodies, are they there in decision making. Now this is something very important, but as students, and all of you are researchers, I would still be more interested in the thematic aspect of women and gender in the science that you are studying. Because for me, as a student of social sciences, it has been very interesting to see how, for instance, science and technology from the field of genetics has influenced and in fact aggravated the problem of child sex ratios. It is new technologies, new artificial, what are they called? Assisted reproductive technologies, the whole phenomena of surrogacy. All these have, in a sense, worsened the sex ratio issue. So what I'm saying is, while the managerial aspect, the physical presence of women where they exist in science is very important. And it's important in terms of ensuring that women's concerns are highlighted in the decision-making bodies. Nevertheless, it is equally important to look at the thematic, how the subject is problematized within the discipline that we are studying. And I think we need many more discussions in the science streams. I know the agricultural scientists started to organize around the 90s, and subsequently the science establishment has addressed aspects of gender. But I feel from the net that I see, the reports and others, the focus still remains on this physical aspect. A, participation, B, presence, C, how many at the managerial level. What I'm saying is the challenge of addressing and problematizing the theme of gender within your disciplines is a bigger challenge. It came into the social sciences over the last 3 decades, and it has transformed the study of our disciplines to a very, very considerable extent. And I think in science streams that is still waiting. We are still waiting for aspects, how assumptions about gender, how assumptions about women, how assumptions about women's roles are built into the manner in which we problematize our research, for instance, or the themes and subjects of our research. And I would like to see a little bit more on that. Unfortunately, I feel that that is still not even in a rudimentary stage, despite the fact that there are now, compared to, say, when I was a student, when women's colleges would hardly ever, I mean, in Delhi University, how many colleges would offer science to women subjects? It was minimal. Once I remember looking at the UGC list in the 1990s to see how many postgraduate institutions were offering science subjects to women, and it was very, very low. Now, since the organizers want me to focus on the question of sexual harassment, you may be wondering why I'm talking about all this. Why I'm talking about all this is because these perceptions, these social realities, these socioeconomic processes shape our attitudes to gender, shape our attitudes to women. You know, if the whole social, the understanding prevalent in the wider society is that women are parasites, women do not contribute productively to social development, then you adopt a certain attitude to women. Women are secondary citizens, not just because of tradition. No, the tradition may ascribe them certain roles, but you are not going by those traditional roles in terms of the professions you're practicing. Those were not traditionally ascribed. However, when it comes to gender stereotypes, we tend to slot women and frame them within those gender stereotypes, drawing upon notions of traditions, which are very, very selective, firstly, and selectively invoked in the case of women. They are not invoked for all categories of citizens in India all the time, but women are somehow these roles, these categories, these stereotypes are thrust upon women, and which shapes attitudes in actual social life, which shapes assumptions in the research we undertake. I mean, Simone de Beauvoir, who fought against Hitler's forces when she was living in France, when France was occupied by Nazi Germany, Beauvoir has written way back in the 1940s saying how the assumption is that women's brains are smaller, and therefore, because women's brains are smaller, that leads to the conclusion, and a widely accepted conclusion, that women are less intelligent and women are sort of lesser human beings. They are subordinate. They are assigned a subordinate position in society. Now, science can be used to challenge these stereotypes. Science can be used to strengthen these stereotypes. Many of our disciplines, for instance, economics, would say, economics is gender neutral. Why do we need to discuss women in economics? Because the market is gender neutral. That's not true. The market operates within this society. And women who engage with the market also operate and engage with it while they remain embedded in those social circumstances which determine their status. So this false notion of objectivity in the name of gender neutrality is something that the women's movement and women's studies have continuously challenged. And that exercise has to continue even when we undertake collection of data, analysis of data, and the conclusions which are drawn in terms of policy frameworks with regard to women's roles. I mean, for instance, no government thinks of allotting or distributing land to women. Why? Because women are not seen as owners of land. Okay, but women are the most active physical social group in agricultural operations. They are there in almost all agricultural operations, and women till today continue to be the dominant category in agricultural labor. However, because in the law, as per law, women did not primarily have rights to agricultural property, the marginalization of women in all agricultural policy, in all land distribution policy, has been a consistent factor, starting also with the British. If you look at the Royal Commission on Agriculture report, there's no mention of women. Then in the introduction, in one para, they dismiss. They say, oh, this report, and this report means it's several volumes of reports for each state, region, presidency, evidence volume. They say we don't look at women because in India, women do not have right to agricultural property. So since they don't own land, and the British government is primarily interested in only in land revenue, women do not pay land revenue. Therefore, we are not looking at women. Even though it is still, as I said, for more than 100 years, we have data how women are predominant in terms of agricultural labor, and the larger section of women still resides in rural India. Now, we also believe that the man is the breadwinner of society. Okay. Now, the pandemic threw that up as a big challenge, because what you found was that in homes, middle class homes, they were dependent on their domestic help, as it is called, domestic servants, as one terminology would call it, the maids, as one would call it. But not only were the homes in which women worked in a crisis, but the homes in which these women lived were in a crisis, because it is a fact that domestic labor, unpaid domestic labor, is one of the main earnings of migrant labor in urban India. This is something which we have failed to recognize, which governments have failed to recognize. The Delhi government, I remember, under Sheila Dikshit, had categorically stated, we don't stipulate a minimum wage for domestic workers because they are not seen as workers. So any number of things can go on, whether it's your Anganwadi, Asha workers. The government of India does not designate them as workers. Okay, so you have more than 1 crore of workers who are either helpers, volunteers, Shiksha Mitra, Falana Mitra, all these kind of policies. Now, why I'm saying all this is that all this determines how a woman is viewed in society. When we want to address the crime of sexual harassment, we have to understand the context in which women's lives are framed, in which attitudes towards women are shaped. Attitudes of men towards women are shaped. The women's movement in India firmly believes and announces from every platform that for us, the question of women's rights is not a gender war. Let us be very clear. The women's movement, the mass organizations of women, have very categorically stated over several decades that it is not a gender war between men and women. Because, as I said, women are part of this society, they are impacted, and men are also unequal when we look at specific categories of women. Nevertheless, women and the female gender is under siege, in a sense, on certain aspects, especially with regard to sexual crimes. And that is why when we talk of the instance of sexual harassment, we need to understand this larger picture within which women, whether they go to, for instance, if jobs are not available, and jobs for women are fewer. The need for women to work is very high because today most families in India cannot survive on single income, except for a very high category in the upper middle class category of our citizens and our homes. Most homes cannot survive on single income earnings. So women, and this notion that women do not work, or as in our middle class homes, we believe that women now go out to work. The fact is, as I talked about the agrarian economy, women have worked in the agrarian rural economy all along. I mean, in history, women are known to be the first to have discovered agriculture. The Neolithic agricultural revolution is identified with women's contribution in agriculture. And in agriculture, women have been predominant, which is your major economic activity in peasant societies. Okay. However, the social perception is that women do not work. Women are not workers. Women do not earn incomes. Therefore, women are parasites, and hence women are rightfully designated as second-class citizens. Now, that pervades our minds. It pervades our social customs. It pervades our social practices, and it pervades the minds which make government policy. And that is why this critique of government policy is important all through. And that when we say critique of government policy, it is not about any particular party, any political party. I remember as a young student, I went as part of a discussion organized by women's groups to the Planning Commission of India. I'm talking about 1980, which is exactly 45 years ago, when Professor Swaminathan was the vice chair. And we had a debate on where are women in the planning process. Does the team which plans for the country, is it aware of what women's needs are in terms of work, in terms of incomes, in terms of rights, in terms of their role in the economy? And that was the first discussion that I attended, as I said, way back in 1980, and that's the first time I went to Yojana Bhavan, which is where the Planning Commission office used to be. Now, of course, the Planning Commission doesn't exist. But nevertheless, governments draw policies. And what are the policies they are drawing up in terms of women in agriculture, in terms of women in industry? If women are going to be mostly in the unorganized sector, in the informal sector, in the most low paid, in the most insecure jobs, in the most hazardous jobs also to some extent, all these frame our attitudes to women, even when they are our own colleagues. So a woman scientist sitting next to me, nevertheless, is seen first through the frame of her gender, which is that she's a woman. And because she's a woman, she's a second-class citizen, she's subordinate, and all her rights are, in a sense, determined by that lens. The gender lens determines the fate as well as the treatment that a woman is meted out, including in our most modern institutions. So that notion of the stereotype of women, and also which frames the notion of what manhood is about, what masculinity is about. And all these aspects determine our attitudes. Another aspect which is most important when we look at how women are treated, or what is the experience of women, even in the formal sectors of employment. The woman who may have struggled to get this education and then to build a career in a situation of unemployment, and in that unemployment and in the labor market, for instance, there are certain stereotypes about women. So a married woman is not likely to find a job very easily. A married woman with children, even less so. So the statistics that we have for women's work show one thing, that women in the age group of 18 to 20, early 20s will be the sort of most employed category, especially if it is in any formal sector. After that, their performance in terms of promotions starts to come down, and you see the petering off. Some women re-enter the workforce after their children are a few years old, but when they re-enter with a lot of prejudice, because the job market is not favorable to women. So those prejudices persist all the time. And that is what we refer to as increased pressure, increased vulnerability, a higher vulnerability of the woman who goes in search of jobs, and a very, very unequal power structure within which women seek work, within which women find work, and within which women struggle to retain their jobs. And it is in this context that we come to what we call the sexual harassment of women at the workplace. I'm leaving out certain sections which I would love to have discussed with you from your experience, which is in terms of the themes in science. Now, what is this law? This law, it's not that this crime is first recognized only in 2013 when the POSH Act, as we call it, is passed. No. I have historical documents from a strike in the 1930s, I think, in Coimbatore and in Chennai, where factory workers in textile industry have gone on strike protesting against a supervisor who was sexually harassing women workers. So it's not as if, all of us tend to think it is Me Too which has first made us think about sexual harassment at work. No, I'm talking about a very long strike by textile women workers in the early part of the 20th century in the southern region, because Tamil Nadu has been a region of textiles, concentrated textile factories for more than 150 years. So these women went on. Then, of course, we had what is called the Vishaka case, in which the government, Supreme Court of India issued guidelines, which in a sense gave us a first definition in law on what is sexual harassment in terms of language, in terms of activities, such as showing content with sexual content and sexual intent in a sense. So sexual harassment, a definition was given, including touch, but not just touch. So it wasn't just physical contact, but comments, innuendo, sexist language, sexist abuse, sexual showing of sexual content, including pornography, etc. So the Vishaka guidelines outlined all that. Subsequently, and this discussion had been happening in other places also, in other countries for a very long time. Finally, in 2013, this came up as a law. Much earlier, a scholar called Catherine McKinnon, for instance, in the US, had outlined that there are different aspects to sexual harassment. One is what we call quid pro quo. Quid pro quo meaning, I don't have the technical definition, but what it means is you do me a favor and I do you a favor. So a person in power who is capable of influencing the decision with regard to your work, your future, pressurizes you into a sexual favor, which is sexual in nature, to say that if you do this for me, I will do this for you. It can be, sitting on inquiry committees, I can say it comes up in annual confidential reports, it comes up in different levels. So promotion is due. Okay, we'll withhold a promotion till a sexual favor is given. So quid pro quo was one aspect that was talked about. And the other aspect was what is called hostile environment, which is understood as unwelcome sexual conduct that creates a hostile work environment. And that is why the Supreme Court's comment on a discrimination-free environment is important. Now, I can go into the details of the law. Basically, 2013, this was given a definition. It provides for the definition building on the Vishaka Guidelines definition, which had come in 1997. But the 2013 law, which is called the Sexual Harassment of Women at Workplace Prevention, Prohibition and Redressal Act. And that is important, that it is not just to say that a crime has happened, but it talks of prevention, prohibition, and redressal. It says that henceforth, sexual misconduct and sexual harassment at the workplace is a misconduct in terms of service rules and will be treated as a violation of the Code of Conduct in terms of all aspects of the Government of India's rules in terms of service contracts, and that all complaints of sexual harassment that are reported, there should be a mechanism in all agencies to address these complaints, to inquire into these complaints, and the mechanism is also spelled out in terms of a committee, which has been variously called different things. Earlier it was the ICC, the Internal Complaints Committee. Now there's a broader definition of internal committee in enterprises. There's another, since the large majority of women are not in formal sector employment, in organized sector, so there is a provision for district level committees, area level committees to address, headed by the district magistrate and under the district administration, local complaints committees, LCCs, etc., to address the complaints and experiences of those women who are not necessarily in, say, institutions like the CSIR. It has also been said that all institutions should publicly display, have boards, for instance, or notices which say how sexual harassment is a crime, and the redressal mechanism should be publicized. So which phone number or which officer to contact, etc. It also then says that within 3 months, so the 90 days complaint should come and should be tackled within the next 90 days. So there's a time frame. The members of the committee are also stipulated. It should be more than 50% should be women. The chair of the committee should be a woman, etc. The procedures for inquiry have been laid down in this act. There's a clause of confidentiality, but it is allowed for a complainant to go outside the committee also and make a public complaint with the police, lodge an FIR, and take it up through that, which can continue as parallel procedures, because if you violate the service conduct, in any case, your service, the institution will conduct a vigilance inquiry, as we would call it normally, and in terms of violation of the rules of service conduct. So these are some of the aspects. There are several issues. Let me say that the Act has several flaws. Another aspect which I haven't spoken of is that the Act says that a false complaint is punishable, and that for that the committee has to specify that it is seen and registered as a false complaint after inquiry, and then the employee is falls under having violated norms and is punishable, is open to action for having lodged a false complaint. Now, there are several lacunae in the law. When the law draft first came, women's organizations they're still very unhappy, but at that time, one of the main things was that the law first draft addressed mainly women in the organized sector. Considering that the large majority of women were in the unorganized, informal sectors of the economy, the law was redundant as far as, say, the large, not just the large majority, almost 90% of women workforce would be falling outside the ambit of that law. That is why those local committees and the district administration were brought in under pressure from the women's organization. The NGO representative part of the internal committee is always problematic, because these can be very good, but they can also come under pressure. There's questions of seniority. When a complaint is lodged, if the members are not at par with the seniority of the employee whose conduct is being investigated, there are several issues which come up. Secondly, the whole question of 3 months. I mean, if you followed the public debate on Trump and all the, what was his name, that all the Hollywood personalities who've been investigated after disclosures by women on account of sexual harassment, etc., Epstein and so many others. The fact is, it takes a lot for a woman to speak up. It takes much more than 3 months for a woman to speak up about this. Trade unions are on record to say that this is not something that women are happy to talk about. So it's not as if a woman makes a sexual harassment complaint at the workplace at the drop of a hat. No. In fact, there is a lot of stigma. There is a lot of victim blaming. There's a lot of hostility at the workplace when a woman complains, apart from the fact that even after making a complaint, justice remains very, very elusive. If you have seen what happened 2 years ago with international sort of champions in wrestling on the streets of Delhi, you'll understand how difficult it is for women to speak up and to get justice after they speak up also, because of which there's a hesitation. So women tend to withdraw, tend to give up on their jobs rather than take a complaint forward. And when a complaint meets with hostility and a complaint does not see justice at the end, that acts as a further negative in terms of dissuading other women to complain. And the whole notion of a false complaint, the women's movement certainly believes that it is not that a false complaint may never happen, but every complaint which is not proven is not a false complaint, neither in the case of sexual harassment nor in cases of, say, sexual assault. It is very difficult to prove rape. It is equally difficult to prove sexual harassment. It is difficult because these are crimes which happen in very private spaces, in private interactions. Evidence is difficult to come by. Evidence from colleagues is also difficult to come by. That is why the organizations believe that this is a negative clause in the Act, 2013 Act, and it needs to be discussed much more at length. So there are several such aspects which we need to discuss. I think I'm going to stop here because I've taken a lot of time. More than that, I feel that this subject needs discussion. In spaces like yours, where women have made a very late entry, there are two phenomena. Women have been there in the science establishment in India for a long time, but the number of women has been much fewer, much slower. and there's a concentration at the lower levels. I think in our public space, we are still learning to interact. We are still learning to interact in more congenial ways, in more cordial terms, on more equal democratic norms of behavior. Our public places are hugely sexist. The language that is used is hugely, often very vulgar, and definitely very sexist. So it's a hostile environment very often for women who go out and seek work. The largest extent of exploitation happens in the search for work. For a lot of women who are in search of work, the atmosphere is very hostile. It's not welcoming. Therefore, to hold on to a job, a woman will do anything. Most surveys of domestic workers, for instance, show they prefer to leave a job rather than make a complaint. And I think that would be similar. So the punishment that is meted out, all that is there in the law. You all can read it, and then we can have a discussion. Yeah. Arpita, I think I'll stop here. I could go on much more, but I think I should stop here and let us have a discussion.
Yeah, ma'am, we really thank you for sharing very deep, insightful thoughts on these very important issues that we, the women, face in today's world. We have to go out to work and we face a lot of issues. As I heard that we are both happy and sad that Women Thought Independent India will offer everything, including women, like fair opportunity, but still we are not there where we would have liked to be. However, things are changing. Situation is changing these days. Recently, in an internal study in AcSIR last year, it was revealed that we have about 50% presence of female students doing their PhD in AcSIR. So, women in today's world should be like, while we are working, we should all be very aware of all the aware and empowered by the rights that we have been given through the various laws of the land. So I'm very happy that AcSIR could have you with us today, highlighting these issues. So I now request all the attendees, all the students attending from the various labs, if any of you have any questions, you can raise your hands and ma'am is here. You can direct your questions to ma'am. I request all of you to please turn on your cameras and request Ashwini to please give access to their microphones if anybody have any questions. The floor is open. I request all the coordinators from each of the labs and the students attending to direct your questions to ma'am, Professor Agnihotri. No questions?
People are always hesitant. You know, the trade unionists.
Yeah, this is such a subject. People would be hesitant to ask
exactly.
questions.
Yeah.
So you can also share your comments in the chat box. Okay, I can see a hand from CSR CMRI Durgapur. Ma'am, there is a question from CSR CMRI Durgapur. Please unmute yourself.
Yes.
Unmute.
No, somebody has already.
CMRI can unmute themselves and ask questions.
Yeah. CMRI, please go ahead. CMRI Durgapur, there is we can see a raised hand. Can you please put your question? जिनका hands है उनको unmute कर दो. ICMR NIN Hyderabad.
Good afternoon, ma'am. Am I audible and visible?
Yeah, please
Yes,
identify yourself.
Visible, I'm not sure, but
Okay, ma'am, I am Sneha Chakraborty, first year PhD scholar from ICMR NIN. I had one question, ma'am. As you said that ART or surrogacy these are worsening the sex ratio issue. So how is it worsening the sex ratio issue, ma'am? Can you just please throw some light on it? Thank you.
Okay. Do you want me to take that, Arpita, or we take another few questions, especially on this particular subject?
Okay, we can have all the questions and ma'am can then answer them together. CMERI Durgapur, CSR CMERI Durgapur. No. RMRC Northeast. ICMR RMRC Northeast.
Yes.
You can please unmute yourself.
Yes. Good afternoon, Director ACSIR and Dr. Indu Agnihotri, Arpita. First of all, I congratulate you for this wonderful topic you have selected. And I'm happy to say that we are in our institute, only 1/3 are boys and like 2/3 are females. So it is a very what you call thought-provoking lecture. And thank you, madam. And I don't have any specific questions, but I thank the organizers and I wish more and more such lectures of common interest to be taken up by ACSIR. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Any other participant have any more question or any comments about this session? I can see no more hands here. Okay, so I have another hand from CSIR NML in Jamshedpur. Please go ahead. Identify yourself and go ahead, please.
Hello, ma'am. I have a question. You have said that complaint can be made within 3 months of incident, and you yourself is saying that it's not right and it's very difficult for a woman to state these things, even to talk or think about it again. So why these things are not getting amended? I think this must be changed, or they must be comforted that they can speak out about it. So I just wanted to know why, when you know that this is the issue and this is problem, everyone know, and they know women's psychology also. It's not easy. So then why government is not doing anything for that? I just wanted to ask that. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll start with this. Yeah. Is there any more?
There is one more question from CSIR UDIP, Pune.
Yeah.
Huh?
Can you read it out? Because I don't think I can see the question. I can't see the question. Can you read it out?
No, we will just check
here. I guess not. No, it doesn't say. It says look at the Q&A, but I can't see a question.
Okay, we can read out the questions, ma'am.
If you can see.
Yeah, so CSR's UDIP, there is a question: as a student of sociology and physics, studying intellectual property at CSR UDIP in Pune, what initiatives would be taken by us at our level in institutions and general public to avoid promotion of pink collar jobs and culturally conceived responsibilities on women to build a constructive environment? Is there? Okay, there is a question from CSIR CFTRI. Can you please unmute yourself and ask your question?
Good morning, ma'am. My name is Navin. I'm from CFTRI myself.
Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I have a questions that we are taking that genders the gender ratio according to the 2011 census, but we are continuing that. That is the COVID. That's why they didn't in the 2021 census. There is stopping the census recording. But my question is, we are calculating the gender ratio according to the 2011 census, but we are 14 years apart from the 2011. So how we can justify that? Means the gender equality we don't know. So what is the, if we take any decisions to that according to that ratio, and this might be the chance to irrelevant to the society, and how we can justify that, ma'am?
Okay. I'll take the last question first. I'm not sure what is being said. What you're saying is that the situation would have changed after 2011, especially given COVID. And therefore, any decision that is taken based on 2011 data may not be justified. Okay, that's the question, as I understand it. Yeah?
Ma'am.
Is that correct?
Yes, madam.
Okay. What I'm saying is, no, the situation may be worse after 2011, but nobody can say. In some cases, for instance, NFHS, we have some other material. NSO also, we have some other material, but census data is not available post 2011. But I don't think any such decision is being taken based on 2011 data, which would be unjustified. The broad framework remains the same. The broad trends remain the same. Until we have a new census, be it in the name of 2021, now they're saying maybe 2026 they will do the exercise. There's nothing to say. And you know, our governments are not known to react so fast. I mean, the issues that would have come in 2021 are still not addressed. Okay, be it child sex ratio or work. In fact, now they are saying, PLFS is saying that since 23 there is an improvement, which is based on the criterion in terms of the category and definition, and it is only showing an increase in what they call own account workers, not in paid employment, but in own account workers. So I don't think the data will make that much difference in terms, in any case, you can only work with the data that you have from government on such matters. You know, what I'm saying is it unless it reverses the trend very categorically, otherwise governments are not known to have responded even to 2001 data accordingly. The only one they tried was the sex ratio, where they had that whole Beti Bachao, Beti Padhao campaign, which has had mixed responses and mixed results. The results that are being claimed are not always correct. For instance, Delhi's sex ratio continues to be skewed, partly because of high single male migration, but that is not always the case. Technology, that brings me to the question of technologies, which the first person had asked. The question of technology, you know, that is why I tried to raise this issue of so-called objectivity, gender neutrality. The fact is, who is approaching this technology? Who has the power? Who has the information? Who has the knowledge? This comes in the wake of high female infanticide, very low birth rates for girl children, remarkably low, which is not the norm. Normal, as Ashok Mitra, Professor Ashok Mitra, who used to be the Registrar General in the 1971 census, he's written 2 volumes on India's population at that time, including a short paper for the Indian Council for Social Science Research on critical issues related to sex ratios. The norm is for more girl children to be born and to survive. Survival rates for girl children were known to be higher. Therefore, child sex ratios being adverse is it's an outlier in terms of international data for girl children. Now, how do technologies work? Firstly, I mean, you know, it's several levels. As someone who read the 1931 census, I remember, the Census Commissioner for Punjab writes in the Punjab State Census report, he says, the children families report is much lower than they have. So he says, for instance, we went to this house, the team, And they said, how many children? And they said, whatever, 2 or 3. He said, but in the room there were more children. So we said, what about these? Whose children are they? They said, no, these are girls. You understand? So this was the bias. Despite that, girl children started to fall from 1921 onwards. You know, the sex ratio, not just child sex ratio, but sex ratio came to be adverse from 1921 onwards. Girl children, then despite girl children not being counted, that was one level. Second is, when are women taken for ARTs, assisted reproductive technologies? I mean, if they've had a male child, no married woman is necessarily taken to a doctor for treatment for IVF. The first premise is there is no child. The assumptions about children being born, I mean, despite now 40 years, at least 40, 50 years in the women's movement, we've been talking that it is not just the woman who's responsible for a child being born or not being born. Initially, and we can still say that the assumption in any marriage is it is the woman who is responsible if a child is not born. I remember going to an Ayurvedic place in Kerala, and within the first year of marriage, if a woman had not conceived, she was being sent for treatment to support the gestation of a child. Now, if a male child is born, maybe the pressure is not so much. But if a girl child is born, the pressure to do things which will ensure a male child is born, I don't know, only a married woman will understand that pressure, okay? It is a daily pressure. It is not an exaggerated pressure at all. It is not exaggerated. It is reflected in what you are offered to eat, what you are advised to eat, how you are taken to a godman or any kind of tantric or anything. Including prejudices like, oh, look at white things because then the child will be fair. All kinds of prejudices abound. But then further, when people are spending so much money in India, and even poor people are spending, we must not think that only the rich go to IVF centers. The pressure on the poor, women from poorer sections is sometimes couples mortgage their land to come for IVF treatment. Scholars who have surveyed and interviewed patients sitting at IVF clinics give very detailed reports on what kind of patients come and how many times they come. The treatment costs are not low by any definition in terms of annual income earnings in India. Who will go for that, and would they settle for a girl child after that? You think so? Now, there are certain technological procedures apart from the XY chromosomes and all that, and what determines the sex of the child, and mass misinformation prevailing or prejudice prevailing in a popular mind about what determines the sex of the child. But attempts are made, and attempts are known to be made about how when the eggs or ova are taken in the petri dish, how the mixing is done, how to ensure a male child. There are studies. You can look at any number of studies on IVF and surrogacy, which will show you that. In fact, there have been occasions when a girl child is born and the parent may have refused to take the girl child, saying you only want a male child. That kind of incidents also happens. Yeah. Now, this question of the pink color jobs, I think and more constructive environment for women. I'm not sure if that's a question or it's it being said that we need to build a more constructive environment towards women's work. Maybe the question could be restated.
The question: what initiatives can be taken by us at our level?
Well, firstly, I think more women in these establishments makes a difference. More discussions helps. More discussions, organized discussions around issues where gender and aspects of gender discrimination are discussed. That helps. I think a joint effort at building positive environments. I think that is crucial. Ensuring that the environment is not sexist, not hostile, and encouraging women, giving them the confidence that if there is an issue, it should be brought to the public notice or the authorities. I think that is, you can't be dividing the public space. And that is not the motive. That is not the objective, that we divide the public space saying, oh, this is male space and women's. No, I think a mixed space is encouraging. A mixed space with open interaction is much more healthy at any point of time. This notion that complaints of sexual harassment are actually vitiating. There are any kind of responses you will find people say, oh, men are hesitant to speak. I don't think it works that way, really. In fact, imagine how it works when the public space is so sexist, the language that is used is sexist, the environment is totally anti-women. How does it work? And women work through that all day. They're always being told, oh, why do you come to jobs? Why do you need to work? Why do you need to work here? Why do you come for these kind of professions? Women are not the first in terms of promotions. They're not the first to be selected for training. They're facing a hostile environment at work and in the family. The family does not see your profession as a profession necessarily. I was in teaching, and the perceptions about teaching are it's a half-day job. I was not being subjected to any kind of hostility. Nevertheless, the assumptions is like I would be asked, oh, you still need to study after teaching for 20 years. You still need to prepare. I mean, come on, we're in professional spaces. We need to keep up to date. But the assumption is that the teacher will come home and give hot food to people on the table, and teaching is preferred as a profession for women for that reason. It's any amount of hostility because of which the professional requirements of keeping up to date, the fact that you need to consult a library, not just go and teach, but you need to consult a library. Teachers had to fight for that kind of thing, saying we need a day off to be able to keep ourselves up to date. Any number of prejudices which prevail, particularly about women who do jobs,
Thank you, ma'am. There's one last question we can take from ICMR NICPR, Noida. Can you please unmute yourself, identify yourself, and ask your question? NICPR?
Good afternoon.
Yeah, good afternoon.
Yeah.
I just want to know one thing. As some reports say, the child ratio is increasing. At the same time, we have one issue also, like son beta preferences. You must be aware of that thing. So how to deal with that limitation, ma'am?
Can you repeat the question, because it was faint? Yeah.
Some report is saying the child ratio is increasing, especially for the girl child ratio is increasing. At the same time, there's a concept called son meta preference, as like people are reproducing as much as female child. After that, after some time, in the hope of that male child will born. So because of that situation, women health is reverting at all, like every time. And women are sometimes considered good.
Arpita, can I request you to repeat the question? Because what I gather is the argument. Please repeat.
It was not very clear actually. We could not hear it properly. If you can please write it in the chat box, we can take your question from there.
From what I heard, the first part said that the ratio is improving.
Yes, ma'am, ratio is improving, but at the same time, there is a concept called son meta preferences.
Son
meta preferences.
Preferences. Yes, definitely. There's a son preference. There's no doubt about it. Son preference is what? Yeah.
Because of that, the child sex ratio is increasing for the women.
Well, the center where I work, is there a sequel? Is somebody speaking? Okay, the center where I worked, CWDS was set up by Professor Veena Majumdar, who was the main person behind the Towards Equality report of 1975, which first highlighted the sex ratio issue, the adverse sex ratio. And the CWDS was continuously engaged in studies around the issue of sex ratios. So you could go to the website and look at several studies about son preference, daughter aversion, as has been said. My friends Mary John, Rajnipal Rewala, Ravinder Kaur, Navsharan Singh, they have done any number of studies over the last 20-25 years, which are all published. They're available on the website. As I said, Ashok Mitra was one of the first to write, and he was the Registrar General for the 1971 census. The Census of India also incidentally has its own presentations on this subject, and if you want, you can ask them. Because I remember inviting the Deputy Registrar from the Census Office to make a presentation publicly on this whole data. What we find, the claim is that data is and ratios are improving. I am not so sure. Okay. And I'm not so sure of the consistency of that data as a trend. Yes, in some cases, those initiatives have helped. The BP initiatives have helped, where governments have succeeded in involving people on the ground. So, for instance, in Haryana, when these initiatives were taken, it was jointly with the total literacy campaign to start with the adult. So the Mahila Samakhya, the literacy campaigns, women who had been mobilized in those campaigns at the district level joined in terms of the propaganda. The fact is, you look at the machinery. I mean, you know, a women's organization called Saheli had a presentation where they showed that, say, how many Indians are afflicted by heart diseases and how many in terms, and you look at the machinery sale, the diagnostics machinery, the heart diagnostic machinery technology is not, the graph is not going up as much as the ultrasound for the sex diagnostics. I mean, it was so glaring. You do not have such popularity of those diseases in terms of mobile clinics, whereas it at one time in the 90s, you know, you couldn't get drinking water in a village, but you could get this mobile van and a Maruti van with this portable diagnostic device to tell you whether your child to be born was a male or a female. and the whole practice of amniocentesis, which we first highlighted in July 1982. I remember we went to Mrs. Indira Gandhi to say that amniocentesis is being used for sex determination, because in Punjab there were posters which would say spend 500 now rather than 5 lakhs later in terms of dowry, etc. So any number of practices are prevalent. The 2011 data had shown, and in many of these things, why we look at child sex ratio and not at sex ratios. Sex ratios, the fact is women's longevity is higher. So, for instance, the 2011 census had shown there were 33 lakh widows. I remember at that time this was the data which was being spoken of. In Kerala, we see what is called the reverse pyramid, meaning with age, there's more women in the higher age group because of longevity, better health, etc. But the women at the lower level are fewer. The girls being born are fewer. And you would be surprised to find, in fact, I remember 2011 census, places like Nagaland, etc., Northeast, where you did not hear of female infanticide and female feticide, as it was called, or pre-birth sex elimination of the girl child, as is more politically correct. But even Nagaland, I remember I was organizing a conference in Guwahati for the National Conference on Women's Studies, and I was trying to get the registrar, the state person responsible for the census collection from Nagaland to come and speak, because they had found in certain districts the ratios were much lower. From 1991 to 2011, we were not talking, Sabu George, who did a lot of work on this, including with the Supreme Court, what we found was that initially we were talking about 927 to 100 kind of, so we were talking in 900s. By the 1990s, district level data was showing that the numbers had come down to 800 to 900 for the girl child, for CSR, child sex ratios. By 2011, in some districts and certain blocks of some districts, child sex ratios had come down to 650 to 750. That's the level of bias that we are talking about. One of the points that has always been made with regard to Punjab, which I specifically studied in terms of agriculture, in Punjab, there was a very clear bias in terms of the male child for land and property. Because since girls do not or did not inherit landed property, and in India, the main wealth in terms of property was agricultural land, and girls are not allowed to inherit agricultural land. Therefore, this bias, both the preference, son preference, and the bias against girls being born, and especially single girl child or two girl children. I mean, you do a survey in your own societies. I propose that we do a survey in middle class societies in Delhi. We have these group or apartments. How many families will you find with two girls? How many families you will find with a girl who has a sister in a particular age group, not my age group? I'm not talking. You will find that if the first child is a girl, most families will go for IVF or assisted technologies with the preference for a male child as the second male child. So the phenomena of having a sister, for a girl to have a sister, because you're going for small families, two-child norm. And the women's movement continuously argued with the government of India, saying, please do not enforce this two-child norm, because it is and at one stage they went child. Now, of course, the Prime Minister is talking of demographic dividend, etc. But the government of India's policy over the last 50 years was two-child norm. Then they even started propagating a one-child. And it was very clear that that was going to go against women. Now, the point that we are making is when these are the prejudices which are, in fact, they draw on customs, but I don't know. I was born in a place which in British India was known to have the highest rate of female infanticide. When I asked my mother how did she survive, she was a single female child, she lost her brother. She said, look, certain castes used to practice female infanticide, all castes did not. But modern India, all castes, all communities, I mean, we embrace the evils of others. So dowry was not prevalent among certain communities, but it is there today amongst Muslims. Syrian Christians have high rates of dowry, as all of us would know. The wealthier the communities, the higher rates. So we borrow the prejudices of others. We do not give up on the malpractices of our own communities. That's the way homogenization is happening in modern India, unfortunately. So we take on the prejudices. We do not take on the positive elements from others. So there's a commonality which is emerging in terms of hostile practices to women. Yeah.
We have one last question, and this is okay. One more got added to the list from CSIR element Jamshedpur. If you can please put your question, and then I would request CSI Triple M Jammu to place their question, and that's where we will end today. NML, can you please unmute and place your question?
Yeah. Actually, I don't have a question, but I wanted to thank all my senior and every elder that you all are trying to make us aware about the rights, and you all are taking your time to organize these things and making us know that what can be done. I think that will be the most important thing, that we'll be able to speak out without any fear. So I just wanted to thank my institute and you all also, headquarter and ma'am. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you. I would request CSR Triple M to please unmute yourself and put your question.
Good afternoon, ma'am. I just have one question. Is there any data available that shows that with the increase in the educational and the employment status of women, the crime against women has come down compared to those from the rural areas who are not educated and who don't have better employments, who are not exposed to the legal setup of the country, better opportunities? Is there any data available on that?
You're saying any data that is specifically showing the link between education and crimes?
Yes.
Yeah.
With the increase in the education, the crime should go down. That's expected.
What makes us believe that? Why would you think that an educated person? I mean, just to before you put the next part of your question, high technology. Digital technology is emerging as a big site for crime today. And who has access to that data?
The educated people. That I understand. With the advent of new technologies, crime always increases. But I just want to know, is there any data available that show that more awareness in the females about their rights, about their legal setup, about the options that they have, the crime has come down?
No, how would higher education amongst women bring down crime? They are not committing the crimes against themselves, no?
No, say for example, workplace harassment. Ma'am, say for example, workplace harassment. Earlier, females were not aware of their rights, but now they are. They are more confident, more educated, they are more involved in the administrative setups. Has this changed anyway?
I'm not so sure. I'm not so sure. You know, you can bring any number of laws. From 1980s, I have been part of movements to bring all the laws that are in place today. The fact is that the narrative, the public narrative is today much more hostile to women. So you get one techie suicide, and as I was trying to tell Arpita the other day, NCRB data which is showing continuously. We have NCRB data from 1995 till now on crimes against women. You look at the dowry death, dowry murder crime. I'm not talking about demand for dowry, which is like 11,000 many cases per, not thousand, even lakhs and all per annum. But I'm talking about murders, death of women due to dowry. You've had a law since 1969, which we fought for and got amended first in 84, then in 1986. Despite that, you live in this society. You can tell me by smiling or not smiling, you can tell me whether dowry has gone down in our society. That's enough to tell us. Has dowry gone down? Exactly. So having a law in place also doesn't. Making people aware, it helps in the sense that when you have a law on sexual harassment at the workplace, it tells a woman that I'm not the only one who's facing it. The fact that there's a law shows that it's a crime. It's a recognized crime. But as I said, most women will choose. I have the president of the CITU, one of the largest trade unions in India, on record to say that women are hesitant to speak about this. And this is a trade unionist who's talking, okay? Not an officer, not a government officer. She's saying that this, why, even amongst trade unions, because in a sense, if a trade union, and I can tell you as an activist, I got cases through trade unions. The first case I heard of sexual harassment, which came as an issue in front of the organization, was brought by trade union. But trade unions are also hesitant to act against their own. That's also a fact. Okay? The more educated girls are, the more difficult it is for them to get jobs. I mean, you have to look at the data on unemployment, you can say, and of educated unemployed, you will find Kerala may be one of the highest. So it is one of the highest data on employment, and the jobs that are available to that level of educated, the data shows contradictions, because those kind of jobs are not available. I mean, they're not available to men, leave alone. I mean, I don't know where you're speaking from, somewhere else, not in Delhi. But during the pandemic, I can tell you, I knew of an architect who was working for 20,000 rupees. 20,000 rupees after 5 years of training as an architect from one of the leading SPAs, Planning Architecture Institute. That's the level of unemployment. And if there is that level of unemployment, the vulnerability of the woman who's in search of employment is much, much greater, because sexual harassment at the workplace is a crime related to power. It's power. It's my power to sign or not sign your AcSIR, or what comments I put, how I recommend or not recommend you for a promotion, how I sign or not sign for an opportunity for you to make a presentation in a conference, especially if it's a conference, international conference, because these are the points which are counted in. So, the level of discrimination that people face in the fields of educated employment is different. The level of discrimination and vulnerability that a garbage picker, one of the big cases we took up, I remember, of a child sexual abuse girl victim. Her mother was a rat picker. She left at 2 a.m. because agar baad mein jayegi, if you don't mind my saying it in Hindi, उसको वो garbage नहीं मिलेगा, वो pre-selection हो चुका. So she leaves at 2 in the morning, leaving her girl child behind, and this girl child is sexually abused in the neighborhood. Now, I mean, that's the level of crime and the level of vulnerability in our society. During COVID, you had reports which showed that because they could not go look for employment elsewhere, the vulnerability in the job market is not a joke. PLFS data is now showing that in the last 2 years there is improvement. We're all looking at it very, very critically, not because we want to look at it negatively, but we want to understand, as scientists, you will understand the importance of data, the importance of observation and critical analysis, which is consistent. I cannot generalize. I cannot generalize on the basis of 2011 data because, as somebody said, the situation would have changed. Unfortunately, governments are very sensitive to data which shows, negative trends because it's seen as a comment on government. As a social scientist, I think, I look at data over 100 years from British colonial times to now. My approach to data is very different from, say, somebody who's looking at it saying, oh, jobs went up or jobs went down, so what happens in the next election? Those are poll analysis and political pundits. But as a social scientist, we look at trends over 20 years, 30 years, 50 years, 100 years. And we look at global trends across societies.
Thank you, ma'am.
Yeah.
So thank you so much for your participation and all your questions put forward by the various institutes. Ma'am, on behalf of ACSI, I would really wish to thank you for taking taking time out of your busy schedule and for this very thought-provoking, insightful talk that our students got to hear today. I'm sure they are taking back some messages from your talk. And once again, I would like to thank you very much for giving us the chance to host you for this session. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Arpita, and thank you, ACSIR, for organizing this. Thank you very much. I wish you more discussions, more provocative and heated debates. That always helps clear the air in a sense, because I feel rather than brushing things under the carpet, it is good to have them on board and open discussions. Much more is needed. So I look forward to your. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Yeah.